All right, GM. This is the Product Guild. How is everyone doing? Let me just turn the overlay off real quick so you can see us. This is my first time doing this, so be patient with me.
No worries. I'll go on X as well and
yeah, all I can see is my
make
face.
sure folks can see this.
The overlay is still on. 1 second. We're here. We're live. We did the walkthrough. I practiced, but it never fails, right? So
yeah.
GM, good evening. This is the Product Guild. We are so excited to have you here tonight. My name is Jessica. I'm going to be the host of your Product Guild, and we are joined tonight by a wonderful guest. Night for me, morning for him, Mr. Phil Hedayatnia. Phil, please introduce yourself. Tell us your journey into design and give us a little bit about how you got into meeting with me tonight.
Sure. Well, appreciate you having me on. I'm Phil. I'm the co-founder of a company called Airfoil, which is basically a product design brand and engineering firm that works on products across crypto. We've worked with the team at Solana Labs. We've worked on Solana Name Service and Zeta Markets and Drift Protocol, Drip House, if you've used that before, many other products across the ecosystem. And we've been doing this now for about 5 years' time. So we got started in crypto, I think, at a time when, honestly, it was even a difficult sell to really talk about design. Given the stage that so many products were at, I remember pitching one DeFi founder and using us back in the day, and who then just said, "Hey, I mean, it doesn't look like Curve invests in their design, and people use them anyway. So why do I need you guys?" But obviously, that's changed a lot over time, right? And as more people have gotten onboarded to crypto, more people have joined the Solana ecosystem. There's also been more consumer applications. The last year, especially, has been really exciting for DePIN. I think it's become clearer and clearer over time the importance of a really good UX to onboard people effectively. My background prior to that was largely working at early stage startups in Silicon Valley, which is actually where I am right now. I'm normally based in Singapore, but I'm in San Francisco for a couple weeks. And I worked previously at a company called Neighborly, which was using municipal bonds to try to fund community infrastructure. And I was heading up product and design there. I was part of a community called South Park Commons, which is an early stage venture fund here in SF, and would kind of float around the portfolio and work on a lot of different design projects. And before all of that, I started my own company that was a hiring and recruiting software company, and took that to acquisition. And that was kind of how I got started in tech.
Yeah, that's amazing. And from a fellow Midwesterner who also got out, congratulations.
Oh, really? Wait, where are you from in the Midwest?
Yeah, Indianapolis.
Indianapolis. Okay, yeah. Nice.
I saw you were from Columbus, so.
I'm from Cleveland. Yeah.
Oh, Cleveland.
Between Cleveland and Akron. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's we always find our way out, don't we? But I find that the Midwest is such a creative hub, and some of the most creative people that I know in my life still to this day have come out of the Midwest. And it's really funny how our stories kind of continue to connect. And I love that you mentioned Drip House, because I see Bloody Berlin in the comments, who's a big drip artist, and he says hello to you. So good morning to you, Phil, from Bloody and Drip House. We love that. I want to ask you a question real quick, because you touched on a lot of hot points in terms of design now with UX, things like that. But let's take it back to the start. I just want to talk designer with you. So in your opinion, if you could define design in broad scope, we'll then pull it down a little bit. How would you define design?
What I define design? There's a really great quote that I'm probably going to butcher from Don Norman, who wrote The Design of Everyday Things, which is that design is an act of communication. It's understanding the user, understanding what's in their head, and working backwards from that. So, I think that definition is really important because a lot of people think that design is the process of taking things from ideas to Figma mocks, and it's about visuals and visual design and all of that. And that's an important piece of it. But the role that visuals play is the role of communicator. If you are looking to use, let's say, an application that protects your wallet from connecting to scams, the visual design of being maybe light mode focused, of using friendly copywriting, of using colors and illustrations that are very welcoming, the purpose of that is to communicate to the user that you've got their back. The purpose of that is to make the user feel good. There's not really much of a difference in my view behind a product designer or a UI designer creating visuals in Figma, or in the course of this conversation, as I'm trying to answer your questions, I'm trying to think about how can I position it in a way that the audience is going to get. Maybe I shouldn't be using as much jargon from my industry and try to connect it back to real problems. That's the process of design. So I say that because I actually am highly critical when designers try to gatekeep the industry and space that we work in and say that the only people who can practice design are professional designers who go and study this stuff and work in this for years. The process of design is understanding the user, doing research, getting out in the field with your product, trying to understand what's in their mind, crafting a message for them that resonates with them, that's clear, that's easy to understand, and weaving that message into the product, making sure there's a good onboarding flow that well articulates what the product does and make sure the user's well informed about it, that answers questions that they might have, things like that. The process of doing that is design. And there's some pieces that like a visual designer would be much better at doing, like let's say illustration or working on like color choices and typography. But there's other pieces, the research side and communication side, that I think any founder can and should get very good at doing themselves as well.
I love that answer because Steve Jobs actually said that design isn't the way something looks, it's the way it works. And I think as we're speaking design, we so often focus on the end project, the end final appeal, that we miss all the steps. And I think as we're getting into Web3, where it is such a new industry, where it's very founder-led, very developer-led, it's almost like a reverse double diamond where we start at the end and then we go back. And I feel like us as designers have to kind of stand our ground a little bit more. And one of the reasons I wanted to have this chat with you specifically is, as designers, it's really important for us to create a shared language with founders or with developers that may have not worked with a designer before. Since you've been in the role as designer and you've moved into founding your own company, what are your suggestions for designers to open the conversation of how to create a shared language to ease communication during that research and while refining the visuals?
It's a good question. How to create that shared language, how to craft something that people are going to understand very intuitively, right?
Because I think with us, we understand design at such a nuanced level, especially if you're into like Don Norman and the way he approaches washing machines or teapots. And we kind of see things as usability, not just the end design. So how do we start creating that language to create a better product? Because the language is so important in the design process when we're working with founders and developers.
Yes. Awesome. So I often explain it to people using something, and there's a talk actually that's pinned on my Twitter that I gave at BreakPoint. It was 2 years ago now, where I lay this out. But basically, there's a guy named Simon Sinek who he had a TED talk that got quite popular called "How Great Leaders Inspire Action," and in the talk he talked a lot about how Apple positions its products versus the way that a normal company might position their products. So I'm going to butcher the example, but basically, if we're talking about Lenovo or Samsung selling a laptop, they'll start with the what, then move to the how, and then maybe cover the why, but probably not, right? So what in this case is, we have a laptop computer. It's got 14 hours of battery life. It's got a sleek chassis. It's got a really, really sharp screen. That's the what. Then the how is we invest in R&D, and we have meticulously crafted this thing. And then the why is really vague, right? There's not really a reason for existence for Samsung or Lenovo. Like they're just companies, right? They just want to sell products. But Apple starts with a philosophy. They start with why. And so I think it's really interesting. I believe it was Eddie Q, but it might have been another Apple executive who said this, that Apple's product philosophy is that you should be using the smallest computing platform for any given task. So the purpose of the MacBook is to pull you away from the iMac. The purpose of the iPad is to pull you away from the MacBook. The iPhone pulls you away from the iPad. The Apple Watch pulls you away from the iPhone. The technology should fade into your everyday life. It should be beautiful. It should spark joy. Like that is a core part of Apple's product philosophy. That's their why. They hire the best designers. They hire the best engineers. They just happen to make computers. Want to buy one. So Apple moves from the why to the how to the what. Other brands move from the what to the why to the how. And he calls that the golden circle. I really like that analogy of thinking about it, because people resonate with why statements. They don't like, if you very specifically want a given thing, right? Let's say you're looking for a crypto wallet and then you go to a website and it says, this is a crypto wallet, then like, great, right? That's very, very straightforward. But there's all sorts of other avenues that we can explore to communicate messaging to people that matters. I remember like in the early days with Drift, we were trying to figure out how to position the product, because every single DEX is going to say cheaper, faster, better, right? There are, that this is, and I was like, what can we do that's different? At that time, we're trying to differentiate ourselves from like Mango, for example. And I was like, what if we go with making DEXs the best way to trade? Almost like a fairness, almost like a justice argument, because traders are coming over from centralized exchanges. Back then, they were coming over from FTX, obviously not anymore. And they were experiencing frustration with DEXs, because not only was the price discovery worse, but also they were slow and sluggish and their interfaces sucked. And we were putting all this effort into making this really beautiful interface. And I was like, what if we equalize the playing field? And that was the why statement. We just happen to make a DEX. And ever since, I think you've seen that argument be made by many other DEXs. If you look over on MegaETH, there's a DEX called GTE that is making the same arguments several years later that we were then. And they keep talking about making it faster, equalizing the playing field. So how did we get to that point? Well, we spent a lot of time talking with traders, and we kept hearing the frustration of, oh, it's such a downgrade using a DEX. And I was like, that's what we have to hinge the brand on. That's our why. We happen to make a DEX, right? And that also gives you a broad brand foundation, because once you've hinged on that why, you can then build multiple products that address something. We worked on something called Stello a while back, which is a layer that sits in front of your wallet and protects your wallet from connecting to scams. And we led with the tagline, explore Web3 with confidence. We just happened to make a security layer for your wallet, but the why is to explore with confidence. Everybody wants to explore with confidence.
Yeah.
But if you position it as, we protect you from scams, only people who've been scammed or who are very concerned about being scammed would find applicability to the product otherwise.
Yeah. How did that why change the end design? Did you reposition elements? Did you change your page structure or menu structure? Or did it only have a change in the overall positioning?
Yeah. I think that honestly, it has to do mostly with the landing page and with copywriting throughout the product. And actually, copywriting has been a big part of how, we do a lot of things at Airfoil, but I actually think that some of the highest impact stuff we've done has been copywriting. Because if you communicate a message really, really effectively, you communicate that why statement really, really effectively, that makes a huge impact. Like whenever we're working with an early stage product, there's always a million things to fix, and you can continue designing and redesigning everything infinitely. So there's got to be a question of like, where do we focus our time and attention that it has the most impact? And I guess like I took that lesson away, because one of the first products that I ever worked on years ago, I worked on basically a professional social network. called Trusted For, and it was competing with LinkedIn. That's really a really tricky product to design because it takes a long time. If you've set up a LinkedIn profile, you know that filling in your entire professional history takes a long time to do. And
Definitely.
long onboardings, of course, are not very good for conversion. But we were a team of 4 people. So we did not have bandwidth to continually keep redesigning the product, keep optimizing. And so I was like, I had this idea and I just designed it, wrote it, and shipped it. And I added in a screen in the onboarding flow that was a thank you note from the founders. I wrote the whole note. I got their approval and I was like, hey, can I just like put your names on this thing? I got their signatures and I put their signatures on the thank you note. And before you enter the onboarding, you would read this note where the founders in plain English would tell you why they wanted to build the product, which is that they wanted to make it easier to find underrepresented, undiscovered talent. And because they were frustrated with LinkedIn and frustrated with professional social networks that didn't do a very good job of surfacing talent. And then they signed their name and you would click a button to continue. I remember we shipped that screen and conversion doubled.
Amazing.
Because the why became clear to the user. If you get that right, then maybe there's parts of your UX that are janky, right? Because you've got limited time and resources to build, but the user's already with you and they're much more likely to put up with an imperfect experience because they feel motivated to and they feel connected to something.
That connection is so important to build, and it's something that you can bring through from an emotional level, from a personal level, as well as, like you were saying, from understanding the very base. And when you were talking about Steve Jobs and Apple, what I was thinking of Nike when Nike launched their Just Do It campaign. What they realized was everyone in the market was hitting professional athletes, and people weren't buying athletic wear leisurely because it didn't have any connection to the regular person. They weren't athletes. So the very first Just Do It campaign was actually an 83-year-old man running through New York City. And it just ended with Just Do It. And it skyrocketed sales because they understood the why. People wanted that relation, but they didn't have that relation to regular athletes. So that why is so important. And I think a lot of times in the design process, we push on it. We know we have to pull it down a little bit more. How do you convince a founder or a developer or even designers on your team that think they already know the why, but maybe haven't explored it deep enough, how to get into additional layers to really open it? Because that does make such a huge difference on the design process.
Yeah, that's the Nike example. That's such a great example. I'm so glad you brought that up. I would say when I'm trying to convince founders of kind of the importance of this, I always try to convey the value of design by talking about conversion and time investment, because I've been a founder and I've been an investor, and like when you're on that side of the table, like that's what you care about, right? It's not just about like how do I create a great experience, but it is like I've got limited time and resources, and how am I going to make the most of that? And so when I'm talking to a founder, I'm going to say, hey, you have 3 direct competitors in your space right now. Right now, if I put your site versus theirs, they look the same. And so you have less money than they do. If you don't do something to differentiate, then they're going to crush you, right? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to position the product in a particular direction and go after an audience that they're not reaching. And that's going to be the way that you build out of the position you're in and win. That's the way that I try to express it, of kind of it's about like the overall like audience strategy, as opposed to I think your visuals are not great in X, Y, and Z way, because that may be what now matters to me, but it's not what matters to them. I guess that's generally the approach that I take. The flip side of it, though, is when I'm trying to convince folks to invest more in their UI UX, I try to put it 2 ways. Either, and maybe this is helpful also if there's folks on the stream that are running their own agencies or consultancies and trying to figure out how do we explain design to founders. Like, this is often the way I do it. 1, if you put time into a really great design system with an excellent component library, not only will the product feel just a lot better to the user, but time to build interfaces goes way down. Like if you've got a really good component system and design system set up, then an engineer should be able to ship a page if it's a relatively simple one without having to run it by a designer first. And so I don't position it as you should be putting time into this design system for the sake of making the app great. I position it as you should be empowering your team to not feel locked down to having to run every single screen through a custom design process. I'm going to empower your team with a better foundation that so you can ship faster, right? It's all about how do we make investments at the outset so that your time to ship every release goes down. Like that's the way that I try to relate it.
Yeah, I think those design systems are so invaluable, and it's just one of those parts that help you to work smarter, not harder. I feel like getting that nailed from the beginning, though, and it might be different when you are a founder of your own agency versus when you're working on house in terms of how much of a voice you have in making that final product come to light. With the design system, where would you suggest the design team to start with that? Because this is a huge conversation in the field right now in terms of how you get that design system going and the value of design system. And design system as a specialty is one of the highest sought after positions right now. It's becoming its own specialized little entity. So when you're going to sit with a design system, do you start with the typography? Do you start with the colors? Or do you just go right into components in like an atomic design first?
Yeah. So it depends on, so obviously it depends on a lot of like, for example, like is it an application that's going to need to work well across like desktop and mobile, because the conventions on mobile are very, very different than web. And I think like starting with web and adapting for mobile generally leads to a pretty subpar experience. A good example is that like on mobile, I think, and I think like Family does a really great job of this. Cash App does a really great job of this. Like you want to use full width buttons whenever you can, and you want to use pop-up sheets whenever you can. Those are not things that work well on web. And so oftentimes you end up needing to have two systems when we're doing something for like web and mobile. But I think what's made design systems a lot easier over the years has been there's just way better foundations these days, right? Like there's things like Tailwind and Radix to help teams get up to speed a lot faster. There have been a lot of projects for which we've started with Tailwind UI and just themed it, and just don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have our own design system at Airfoil that or our own design system template that we've created. And so it helps us get started on projects a lot faster. So once we're done with like the branding process, where we would do a lot more work on color selections and typography and things like that, we can simply feed in those values into an existing design system we've created. And then from there, it's just making tweaks to adjust that design system to the needs of the client. So I don't think teams need to reinvent the wheel. I think that when a team is very early, it's important that the application feels polished so that it is trustworthy, right? Up until the line of establishing trustworthiness. If the app looks a little bit generic because you're using Tailwind UI components and other sites are using the same components, I would argue that like that's not great, but it's also not awful. What's bad is if the site looks janky, right? So once you've cleared that bar, the next thing that's important to do is make sure that why statement's really clear, make sure the landing page is very good, make sure that people understand that at the outset. If you're a pre-seed founder, that oftentimes gets you far enough, right? Mm-hmm. And then as the product matures, and also as you exit the kind of early adopter group and head to like early majority, we think about the adoption bell curve, then that's when I think like you should be doing all custom components. You should be investing in a fuller system. I hope that kind of answers the question.
No, I think that's a very valuable answer, but I was trying not to laugh because there's so many janky websites in Web3. And I feel like so often we go back to that world of like GeoCities or LiveJournal, with like basic HTML and so many websites, and they do really well. So I just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of somebody that I've recently met who works for a marketing firm, and their website is straight core HTML. And I think that's a
Which
different
marketing
case.
firm would that be?
I don't want to blast them.
I wonder if it's 40 IQ.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. So we did that site.
No. But it works so well. And I'm
sending this to Jean right afterwards. It's
no,
hilarious.
please don't. Oh, no. No, because
but it's intentional though.
And I said,
there's
it's
some,
so basic, but I love it and it works so well and I'm really here for it. But that's a trend too. So from the outside, people don't understand that brand, but then the people that get it. So
yeah.
talk to me about that.
I love
No,
this.
Dean's going to kill me if you tell him, be like, I just talked to Jessica and she said you have a janky website.
I mean, we're doing it live on. Well, I think like so. I'll explain. Maybe the best way I can explain it is this, right? If you've ever been to a casino, I think one of the first things that people notice is that the carpeting sucks, right?
Yeah.
It's this weird pattern. You're like, who the hell picked this carpeting? There is full intention behind that. The intention is the slot machine should feel as if it's a respite from the chaos of the environment. That's what gets you to play slots, right?
Yeah.
I mean, casinos hire armies of psychologists to understand how every last decision they make is going to impact experience, right? Even I've been on spaces before where people have said, pump.fun looks horrible. Who could ever design in such a way? And I think there are things that could do better, but when you open pump.fun for the first time, they explain the rules of the game. You accept that you know the rules, you enter, and then they bombard you with like tons of information and visual stimuli. When I saw that opening, here's how the game works screen, I was like, these guys are way smarter about UX than people think, or that they let on. And in fact, like there's a lot of intention behind what they do. In 40IQ's case, like the kind of weird, like late 90s GeoCities-esque design, like it is very, and I'm sure Dean will explain that better than I will, but it is super intentional because it's like they want to communicate not just the value of founder-led marketing, but also the core of founder-led marketing on crypto Twitter is just like being a degen and like being kind of in the trenches in these communities. So the brand should emulate that. And then when you see another marketing firm out there that's got this super slick, polished website, blew 100K on an agency to do fancy animations, like it's meant to contrast to that. With Airfoil, we have a one pager that has several paragraphs in what we do, and we have a list of the clients that we work with. The intention behind that is that when I was getting started and I came out of an accelerator, like highly technical accelerator environment, right? And so every day I was working with technical founders as the design guy. They would go to different agency websites and they would see lots of cool animations and cool visuals, but they don't know what that means. They're like, what does that mean for the product I'm trying to build? And we've always tried to position ourselves as, at Airfoil, we're builders who will like be in the trenches with you. And we're not optimizing our marketing collateral for what other designers will like. We're optimizing it for what we think founders will like. And that I think has like set us apart in our marketing.
Okay. So playing off of that a little bit as we're talking designer, what if what the founder likes doesn't align with the market fully? I think in the case of 40IQ, it's brilliant. The first time I saw it, I ran across a tweet from Dean. I stalked him for a while. I was like, listen, I have to talk to you. I had the opportunity to talk to him. I was like, I love your website. It's great. It's so goofy. It's like nothing I've ever seen, but it plays into the whole, we're good and we don't need to do any more type of mindset. So I'm really glad, actually, now that I know that you did it, that you got to explain that at a little bit of a deeper level. I was not expecting that. But what if that founder vision doesn't align with the market? How do you adjust that? Because that can impact the why or the user psychology. And we really do have to, I think Web3 is interesting because to some degree, through basic psychology patterns and the basic UX heuristics, what they're going to do. There's certain trained habits that people will do, whether it's Web 2 or Web 3. But then Web 3 goes a little out of the box as well. And a lot of Web 3 is about creating a universe, immersing people into a new world, bringing them in, giving something they've never seen before. But to some degree, we have to find that balance. So how do you do that? Or how do you speak with the founder in that case?
Yes. So I'd say the biggest thing that I try to encourage is as much user research as possible, including as much in-person user research as possible. Because the sort of qualitative feedback you get in those sessions is both very important, but it also teaches the founder a lot, right? I have definitely worked with founders over the years that are like, this is really clear. I don't need to reposition this. Like everybody that I'm talking to knows like what we do, and I think that like our explanation of our product is working. And we will then do user research sessions. I will record them, snip them, and send them to founders and be like, well, it didn't work here because I showed this user a landing page for 10 seconds, 15 seconds. I asked them to explain what your product is, and they explained your product is something totally different than what it is. So clearly it's not working, right? So the biggest thing is like bringing evidence to the table. That actually is one thing that I've done for, probably a decade now. It's been like, it's the oldest and easiest trick in the book when it comes to testing landing pages. You only have about 10 seconds to hook your user at least into the why to get their interest so they can continue scrolling the page. I would put the laptop in front of somebody. I would time 10 seconds or maybe even 15 seconds. I would then grab the laptop, pull it away and say, tell me what you just saw. Tell me what the product is. And if they were way off, right, I'm noting that down as like, okay, we failed. Like something needs to change. So that's typically the way that I just try to bring evidence to the table whenever I can. When we can't do that sort of user testing, I often recommend things like session playback tools. So like, for example, there's a tool called Full Story that you can install, and then it enables you to actually do session playback of everybody that comes to your site. You can see what they're clicking on. You can see how long they're spending in certain sections. And that also gives us a lot of very useful data. So we can go back and say, hey, it was pretty clear that the users kept clicking this thing because they thought that it would take them to another place and it didn't work. For example, talking to founders who are like, hey, let's just throw users into the application. We don't need to have a landing page or an onboarding flow. Let's just get them to the app as quickly as possible. And I'll be like, hey, here's the Full Story records. And I'm showing you that several hundred people went into the application, started trying to click the buttons to trade, and did not realize that they had to connect their wallet first. So I know you think that that's a very obvious thing that anyone in crypto should know, but I'm telling you that you just lost like 14% of your users right here because they clicked in the app, thought the app didn't work, and moved away. So let's find a way to catch them.
Yeah, I love that you said that you give them 10 seconds, because I'm going to blow your mind with a statistic real quick that you might already know. But it used to be we had 10 seconds because we would drive and we would see billboards and we would have to process the billboard. And when Instagram came out and social media, it dropped to 3 seconds. Now that we're into TikTok with the doom scrolling, we have around 0.3 seconds before someone decides if they're interested or not, whether that's social or whether that's talking. So 10 seconds is actually so generous. And if they don't get it in those 10 seconds, they don't get it. And that's a really important statement that you made as well, because we take so much for granted that the user will do this because it's how we understand. So how do we—
10 seconds is very generous, I would agree. And actually, even so when I was in high school and I did an internship, it was my first job in design. I was working for a company that was building an alternative non-letter grade based academic transcript for K-12. And I was working on parts of the design of the transcript that college admissions officers would review. And we were told that on average, to review a college application in terms of first pass, an admissions officer takes 4.5 seconds to make a decision of whether to pass to the next pile. And so I kind of like took that lesson from all the way back then, and I've just like continued using that as a gauge across the rest of everything else I've done in design.
Yeah. So let me ask you a tough question then, because we've got about 10, 15 minutes left. We get so attached to our product and our ideas that sometimes we take those certain steps for granted and we're not able to remove ourselves from that process. And this creates a cycle of frustration between designer, developer, founder as well, where the answer is, I don't know what I want. I just know it's not that. I don't know how many times you've heard that, or, make it pop, or that doesn't pop. And since we're talking, how do you talk design? I feel when I asked UX UI designers in the field, and I looked specifically for fresh designers entering from Web 2 into Web 3 for what they wanted to hear from you the most. The number one question is, how do I speak to a developer or founder in the design review when they say, I don't know what I want, but it's not that, because they can't remove their attachment to their process flow on the website.
Yes. I've had a lot of those conversations. And,
they're so valuable.
Absolutely. A good example of this, I won't name the company, because I love the founders of this company. They're good friends of mine. But there was something I remember in a design review we did for a recent redesign where one of them was like, okay, what's not working? What's not working with this? And he's like, dude, it doesn't have enough soul. Can we add more soul? And there was a piece of me that died inside. And I was like, dude, I have no idea what that means. Like, please. But the way to handle that conversation is to then say, okay, let's talk about what does have soul. Give me another brand. It might be Nike, right? It might not be a competitor in your space. It might not be anything in crypto. It might be, what's a brand? When that word comes into your mind, tell me what you think about, right? Tell me, what do you think about? Tell me about an event in your life that makes you think about. Give me more information about that feeling. And we then often tries to build a mood board off of that we then present back and say, does this convey the feeling? And that matters in a trying to explain it better, but like we worked with the guys at a company called SF Compute, or the San Francisco Compute Company, last year, and they were trying to convey of not just like, they are a compute exchange that makes it possible to buy compute to train large language models, right? Yes. And so like, normally we would have a brand conversation that was about how do we convey how SF Compute works, right? How do we convey to developers who are building these models that SF Compute is going to get them that compute in a more fine-tuned way, cheaper, faster, better. But they were like, actually, there's this kind of vibe of like SF coming back. There's this vibe of like, how do we accelerate tech adoption? And how do we bring back kind of a techno-optimistic vibe? And so working alongside them, we came up with this. We saw that Intercom did a redesign where they used AI generated illustrations. These almost like children's comic book style bright illustrations with like bold blues, bold greens, like sunshine. And we're like, let's run with that, right? And so we created this like SF imagery that was AI generated, bright, vibrant, and they've got a really brilliant product engineer there who then took that and started weaving in a lot of those illustrations and elements throughout the product experience. And so normally a very staid, it's a compute exchange, like it would normally be a very basic minimalist product, but core to their brand is now these like really cool illustrations. Airfoil, we've also done this. Most design agencies are relatively minimalist in their approach. A lot of them are just like black and white, right? And we're like, no, we're going to be bold, like computer blue, and then we're going to have all these hand-drawn illustrations core to our brand, because we want to also play into that kind of techno-optimistic vibe. So a long-winded way of saying that when you get feedback that's kind of vague like that, it's not actually bad feedback. It's just we've got to run a process to deconstruct that feedback and understand if the feeling that someone has is this isn't bold enough, or this doesn't have enough soul, or this has too much soul, or whatever. It's like, okay, give me more information about that feeling. And I, as a designer, my job then is to produce things and put them in front of the founder so that they eventually look at it and they're like, yes, that's what I meant, right? But I shouldn't be blaming the founder for not telling me exactly what they want, right?
Exactly. And I love that goes back to asking the why. I think as designers, that's what we keep doing, right? Is we keep asking why until we get to the end, and we're going to annoy ourselves and we're probably going to annoy the founder, but eventually we'll get there, or we'll realize it's not the project for us. I also think it's okay to say, okay, maybe I can't create that vision, or I can't dig the right way, or to walk away from it for a little bit and then come back to it. What's the longest it's taken you to get to a why? Just out of curiosity.
Honestly, not. I think the longest it's taken us ever is like probably 2 months.
Yeah.
But that has a lot to do with the type of clients we take on as well, because if we're spinning our gears for 2 months and we're just not nailing that, then like it's probably best to part ways. Like maybe we're not the right people. To your point, because that's a lot of time to burn, and I would say normally it's a lot less. But we also do a lot to try to understand that why. We have sent our staff to hackathons so that they can interface with like the Solana community as directly as possible. Like I've flown people around the world, like literally to just like meet with builders and get as immersed as possible. That's always been core to our process. Even before years ago, before we were doing all this work in the crypto space, I was working, I remember, on automation software for people who do like assembly line programming. And I went and drove 2 hours up from here to literally a manufacturing plant to just like meet with the actual people at the plant who'd be using the software. Like I'm such a strong believer in that sort of immersion. I think that shortens those timelines to get to a Y really significantly. And one of the reasons that we've got these different hubs around the world, we've got people here in SF, we've got people in Toronto, we've got people in Singapore, in Seoul, in Kuala Lumpur, in London. It's actually because crypto is also very global, and for us to have people who can always go out in the field to understand users, it is a superpower that I can pick a person from Airfoil's footprint around the world, and I can be like, you go into that market and do that and understand it, and report back what you find.
I have to tell you what I love about this conversation so much is I researched you really heavily. I researched Airfoil really heavily. Anyone who knows me knows that I will come into anything with a block of notes. Like when we talk UX research, I'm going into research everything. The way I wanted to steer the conversation today was, how do we talk about white space? How do we talk about heuristics? How do we talk about the rules when we're in that room? But it took such a direction into a way that I love, that I appreciate this so much, because I think it does show that design can be a more technical conversation as well, in terms of what we're trying to do is we're not just trying to do a pretty picture. We really are trying to find the best way to make something work. And design at the end of the day is a science in terms of understanding psychology and behavior and anticipating the needs of the user. So I think my next question real quick is going to be, as Web3 grows, and we're bringing more people in, and we are dealing with more complex sets, like data-heavy websites. The check-in process is so different. The use process is so different, as you've already highlighted, and as we all know. What do you think is most important for somebody who's seasoned in Web 2 to learn as they come into Web 3? Do they really need to know all the technical aspects to sit in that room? Or what do they need to know first?
Yeah. So I very frequently get the question, like, what's different about designing in Web3? Mm-hmm. And my short answer has always been, there is nothing different about designing in Web3. Because if we are talking about, let's say that we're talking about an AI product, right? Let's say it's an app that enables you to generate stories and send them to friends using, interfacing with AI agents, right? In order to design that product, I would need to understand very well how those agents work. What are the limits of those models? What interface kind of paradigms I might be able to use. I would have to know what interface paradigms are people used to. What are other products doing that they might be moving over from? What are kind of like, patterns that people will recognize immediately, right? I would have to narrow down on my audience and personas as well, right? If the focus of that app is like Gen Z, then I'd probably want to take some interface like cues from Zenly, because they might be coming over from Zenly or Snap, right? That process is the same regardless of the tech that's being used. The difference is we're talking about a Web3 product. It's like, I should probably understand how MPC wallets work, because we're probably going to use like some sort of MPC configuration, whether it's privy or whether it's turnkey or something like that. So I need to know what the limits of those are, right? I need to know, and then I need to do research into what are the products that people may be moving from. and what are the interface patterns that they're used to. But the process is the same. The difference is the underlying tech. But I think that regardless of what the tech is, you have to understand the tech very, very well. So the problem is when a Web 2 designer comes in the Web 3 space, doesn't take the time to understand the audience, user, and tech, and then design something, then yeah, you're not going to get a good outcome. But that would be true of a Web 3 designer going and doing an AI product. Same exact thing. So as long as you do that research process, and yeah, that takes time. And yeah, somebody who's done it more in Web 3 might do it a bit faster, but it's the same fundamental process at the end of the day.
I love that answer because I know so many talented designers that are afraid of the tech stack and they're like, I don't understand this, I don't understand that, I don't feel like I can come into it. And there are so many similarities in the process flow, and the way you understand the general gist of it is very important. So I've got 2 questions left for you. One is another one that's technical, one is a little bit more fun, and then I'm going to let you go because I know your time is super valuable. We're so grateful that you came in here, and we got started a little late due to my tech issues, not yours.
No worries.
When you put that design, that final design, you've gone through the beta rounds, you've gone through the testing rounds, you have final design .1.5.7. This is final. This is final. This is really final this time, and you're showing that final file to your client. Walk me through how you show that. How much do you present it through the user flow? Do you present your design choices? What's most important to you?
So we are a little bit weird in our approach. I have always the way that we work with the clients you work with is we set up a joint Slack channel, and as stuff is presentable, it's just we shoot it in the channel, and when we need to do ad hoc calls, even a couple calls a week if we need to, we just do the calls. It's a lot closer to if you had folks on your own team and you were just jamming in person, what that experience would look like. So of course there are structured reviews, right? Like if we are getting towards the end of a process and we want to, for example, do a review that involves product design and engineering, then we're going to do a presentation where we're going to step through, here are all the screens that we've created, here's all the new components that we've had to make for this, like that sort of thing. But we don't do as many, formal presentations of design direction, research, etc., because as research is happening, we're sharing it out async, right? And I think that is a good way to work overall, because especially when you're working with early stage clients, the founders are also doing that research every day, right? They're going out into the field, they're learning things, and we want the founders to be shooting us what they learn as they learn it, and we want to shoot them what we've learned as we've learned it. So of course, like when we're working with more mature companies as well, there's more of a formal review process where I would say we try to always structure, and different designers do this in different ways, but we try to always structure it around what have we learned about the user and what problems are we trying to solve for the user, and then provide okay, so we show the Figma file and we say we always introduce the problem first, then show the solution, as opposed to okay, here's just what we've done. But it ends up being very fluid for a lot of the projects we work on because of that manner of working together that is, I think, pretty atypical for an agency, but is also core to how we approach things.
I love that, because I find design to be a very collaborative, communicative process where it is a lot of iterations and a lot of back and forth. It's not as simple as here's your idea, here's the finished product, we're done. It does take a little bit of time to get through. And so I love how you presented that. And I think it does make it stronger when you are collaborative. So I love that so much. My final question, you cannot use Don Norman. You cannot use Nielsen.
Okay.
Who is your biggest inspiration in terms of a UX, UI, or design resource?
You knew this was going to be a hard one.
I'm ending every product guild with this question just so we can build an amazing resource library.
Who is my greatest inspiration? The first name that came to mind. Shout out to Benji Taylor over at Avara, because when his company, when Los Feliz Engineering, which got bought by Avara, the company behind Aave, released Honk, back in the day. I think every designer saw this immediately. They created so many really interesting UX paradigms on mobile. The concept of these like of you have a core canvas in the app and then you have sheets and you do everything in sheets. The micro interactions in family, when you enter in a seed phrase, it'll show each box one by one. And then when you've typed in the word in your seed phrase, then the continue button goes green. All those little details, I think like we just like took so many notes from that. But Honk, the messaging app that they made before, was just so beautiful. And I think they created, I honestly think that they and the Cash App team both created an entire style of mobile finance applications that a lot of folks have honestly copied since. I mean, if you look at Clout on Solana, they took so many cues, I think, from the work of the LFE team as well. So yeah, maybe that's the first name that comes to mind. And the dumb example that I'm sure every designer would give would be Apple, but I think like what I would say as my reason why is because they made it very clear that your job in research is to understand your user's problem, not to have your user give you the solution to that problem. That is a very simple thing, though, that at the same time I think is very unclear when people do research. Like, your user is going to tell you the features they want. That is not what you need to get out of user research. You need to understand what is the problem they're facing. You then build a product around that problem. Test it by giving it to them and seeing if they'll use it. That's how you find out if you solve the problem or not by asking them. And that, I think, has like made its way. There's a book called The Mom Test that's like a super awesome intro book where people are learning how to do user interface or UX research that I think distills a lot of those points down. Yeah, so that's a very generic answer that I'm sure most designers would give, but I think it's also a really crucial point at the same time.
Yeah, the mom book is a lot like Don't Make Me Think.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Please give a quick shout out to how our listeners, founders, everyone here can find you. I'm going to tag you as well. I'm going to do show notes. This was insanely invaluable, but where can people find you, reach out to you immediately?
Yeah. So I'm at Phil Hedayatnia on Twitter. If you can type my last name and my first name, you're good. And then Airfoil is at Airfoil Studio. You can also find me on Telegram at Phil Hedayatnia. I do check my DMs. I'm always down to provide feedback or give second set of eyes on anything people are working on. And for designers that might be watching the conversation as well, like I'm happy to do portfolio reviews and stuff like that. Yeah, I think it's probably the best way to get in touch.
Amazing. This has been loaded with so many great pieces of thought. I just want to kind of reiterate real quick that design is about making something work. We're looking for the why. We're doing the research. It's about standing behind your convictions. It's not so much about the pretty picture, and don't be scared to get a little dirty and go a little bit deeper. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you being our first guest on the Product Guild. I'm so thankful that we got to do this, and you really just kicked us off with a bang. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.
This is really fun. We appreciate it.
You're welcome back anytime. We can talk research later, and you can tell me how to stop researching, okay?
Happy to. Thanks so much.
Ciao.